But basically, that's my slide. I gonna do both. So a little bit of context, and then I'm gonna share some code, share some ideas about okay, NoSQL with Java. Right now, I'm working in Jakarta specification. If you never heard about Jakarta, basically is a new home from Java E, right? So basically the whole idea. I guess Ivar gonna do a presentation to this event as well. So basically the whole idea is to move Java EE to Jakarta EE under Eclipse Foundation organization. The whole scope is to make it more open source and more transparent. Okay, should I start? No, yes, maybe. Omer. Uou, vamos começar. Nice. Okay, let's start. Hello, everybody. That's amazing to be here. If you'd like to see my screen better, please double click on my presentation. Uh, Today, let's talk about NoSQL design pitfalls with Java. Why should I say that? Basically, the whole scope is say, okay, probably you have heard about NoSQL database, right? So what is next? What should I do next on my Java application? What should I do next on my Java EE application, my Spring application? What are the next steps? My name is Otavio Santana. As I mentioned before, I'm from Brazil. My Twitter handle is Otavio Java. And right now I'm working at Platform SH. Platform SH is a company who makes your job easier when you want to take your application move to the cloud, right? A little bit more about me. So again, Otavio Java, handle at Otavio Java. I'm Java champion, executive member from JCP. If you don't like Java since Java 8, blame me. I have been help the committee of Java since Java 8. I'm a Eclipse committer, project leader, some specification as well. And on my free time, I decided to write book and articles about technology. Therefore, yes, I need more friends. I need more social time, and I need to have more fun on these times. Why not? Why not? I don't have this. Yeah, I just write some articles and blog posts about technology. Probably you have heard about NoSQL database, right? So let's start with the opposite. What does not mean NoSQL database, right? So what it is not NoSQL. The first step is NoSQL does not mean no security. There's a huge research about security and vulnerability on NoSQL world, and they find around 75% of the OpenRedis server infected. What does mean OpenRedis is on Redis instance where it has a public IP and this server has not user and password. If you are using NoSQL database, please don't put the public IP. Don't expose your server publicly with this kind of IP. And if the NoSQL has the research to make happen, please use user and passwords. Why not? And remember, right now we are living in the cloud age, cloud native age, cloud friendly age, and that is the 12 factor application where the third commandment is about configuration, right? Don't put password and user information, any kind of credential directly in your code. Please use environment to make that happen. If you are using Spring Microprofile Jakarta E, you have the option to create a file, a property file that has the default configuration to run locally. And yes, you can override on production. Why that? In the real world, in the perfect world, the developer does not need to know the credential from production. I, as a developer, I don't need to know where is my user and where is my password on production. Okay? First, NoSQL does not mean no security. The second one, what's not NoSQL database? That does not mean data integrity. You need to use a lot of formalization to make sure when you use MongoDB for sure, because MongoDB is scanless by default, right? You need to make sure the value has the same type. For example, if you are using a collection of person, make sure every time that has a type name, it is a string. Every time that has the date, has one single type of date. Okay? Schemaless does not mean massless. And for sure validation, there's a nice article from Mark Fowler who says when make a type. Therefore, if you'd like to create some type that has complexity, you can create your own type. For example, money. You can create a type for email because email is not just text. Email has validation. You need to put the at, you need to put the domain, you need to put several stuff. So make sure when you create complex types, validate it, right? So another point, when you decide to put a new layer, a new tire, we need to think about the complexity. NoSQL does not mean no responsibility. We need to think about, okay, I'm gonna put that new database on my infrastructure. Who gonna take it? Who is the new responsible for that new piece of database, the new instance? We need to think about backup. We need to think about maintain. We need to think about who gonna take that as the responsibility, right? Think about it. Complexity, you're gonna put a new layer and maintain, right? And yes, for sure, every time that somebody says, okay, I'd like to use NoSQL database because I want scalability. The whole point about scalability, that means a lot, right? We need to make sure that you are doing the right questions. Because when you talk about scalability, what does that mean to you, right? Horizontal scalability, vertical scalability, where I'm gonna take advantage, where I don't gonna take advantage. Remember, when you talk about soft architecture, everything has a trade-off, right? So make sure about that. Do the right question. Don't trust on the benchmark from the company. Think twice. Did you have seen something about, okay, look, my benchmark company show my product's not good enough to you? Usually the benchmark company shows that's amazing, that's wonderful, use us a lot, right? Please take time to do your home benchmark to put your context on that test. And for sure, when you talk about responsibility, scalability, NoSQL database do not mean no mistake. You're probably gonna do some mistake around the NoSQL word, right? As I mentioned before, make sure about the benchmark. And beyond that, there is the cap theorem. Why I'm saying that? Basically, uh, uh, when you usually use SQL database, when you usually use something like MySQL, PostgreSQL, you have several features that let you take and move to another persistent storage, right? Like Cassandra. However, that is not possible. The cap theorem remind you there is no perfect word. There is no silver bullet to you. You need to take two. behavior from tree. For now, it's impossible to take the whole benefits of the distributed that data system, right? This is an amazing book that I recommend you to read about. So, database internal. It has several tips so you can learn about how the database works internally. And beyond that, when should I use one? When should I use another one? And that's the whole point. Yes, no SQL does not mean no trade-off. Remember, you need to think twice when you choose this kind of technology. As I mentioned before, in the fundamentals of software architecture says again, uh, everything is a trade-off. When you choose some technology, you're gonna take good points and bad points. And yes, there is a huge discussion around the backup on NoSQL database, right? How can I do backup on Cassandra? How can I do backup on MongoDB? How can I make that possible? And yes, NoSQL does not mean single solution. You can use SQL with NoSQL. You can use just NoSQL with some situation. You can use both. And yes, why not? You can use new SQL. Basically, the whole idea is to create a SQL who has features from NoSQL database. That's this nice book about, okay, let's learn about uh, polyglot past tense. So if you'd like to know more, I recommend this book. Okay, first, I mentioned what NoSQL is not, right? Let's move on to model. As you probably already know, modeling is the key of NoSQL database. That's where there is the biggest mistake. And usually on the NoSQL, you model your application on the perspective of view. Therefore, we need to define uh, how you're gonna show that information, and based on that, you're gonna create the queries, therefore, and then finally create the model. That is a little bit different from normalization perspective on the SQL world, right? So we need to have this kind of balance. And yes, you probably have heard about that a ton of time, right? Because on the model way, on the NoSQL way, on NoSQL perspective, everything is about model. Let's start with my first sample. Okay, let's start talking about Cassandra. But first, let's let tell you what Apache Cassandra is not. Usually, when you heard about Cassandra, they mention something about, okay, let's do big data, let's do rich query, let's do relational database. Usually, okay, let's use Cassandra because relational database is not enough to me. There is some point I'd like to make sure to you. First, yes, you can use Cassandra to big data. However, rich query is not a good point to use Cassandra. Usually, Cassandra is more about use a key to find information. Yes, you have more options. I'm gonna tell you later, but usually keep the query by key. And you are not able to do relationship on Cassandra. You are not able to do win and join, something like that on Cassandra database, right? Okay, let me talk about queries on Cassandra. First, uh, the best approach as possible is you use key. In the other words, try to find every time any kind of information, use a key. Find by key, right? If there is no option, you can create a secondary key. Basically, is not key field where you can index to find information. Otherwise, you're not able to find any kind of information from that column family. Column family, think about table, right? And the third option is allow filtering. Avoid to use that. Again, the highest priority is use the key, find by key. If that's not possible, secondary key, that's a resource to use Cassandra. If that's not possible, avoid allow filtering. Usually when you are using allow filtering, you did your modeling wrong. Cassandra also has good points. You have special types on Cassandra, such as list, map, tuple, and UDT. List, if you're a Java developer, is the exact same thing. You have the list and set. You have the map that basically works as something. Tuple is kind of entry where you put the ID and the respective value. And the UDT is user-defined type. Basically, if you want to create your own type, your custom type, you are able to do that. If you remember the example of money type, right? Usually money has the currency and the value. You can create a type where it has a text as currency and a big decimal as the value. That's possible with Cassandra. I create also the biggest mistake that people usually do in Cassandra. The first one is try to put load balancer in Cassandra. You don't need that to use Cassandra. Please don't do it. Constants level all. And in Cassandra, you have the possibility to every read and write. You can find uh, the constants level. The constants level all mean that all the nodes available basically gonna write and read some kind of information. If you do that, you're gonna uh, you're gonna lose the availability of your instance, of your Cassandra instance, right? So you need to take a balance between consistency and availability. And the last one, backup. Yes, that's not easy to do as a relational database. Think twice. There are several approaches like asynchronous backup, um, and also you have the snapshot. The whole point is Cassandra is distributed database system. What I can say about that is if you take backup from just one instance, um, you're not sure that the whole information is there. Let's take an sample here. So for example, I have the context. If you have Google Calendar, something like that, probably you saw something like that. Uh, I have my name, where that is my ID. I have my birthday, that's local date, and I have my details. Basically, my key is my contact information, and my value is my information itself. For example, email, my email itself, phone, home phone, something like that. So basically, what I have here is the key and the value as just one single table, right? That's a little bit different from SQL technology because uh, probably here I need to create a new table to make this kind of relationship. Here on Cassandra, you don't need that. You can put the whole information as one just single row, right? So on the sample here, I'm using the map. Let's take another sample. As you can see here, I created the car model, my car. It has some types, and then I have my owner. My owner, you can think about my embedded entity where I have my car, and my owner has more information about the ownership itself. So the name, the ID, the document, something like that. If you are familiar with MongoDB, you can think about uh, subdocument to Cassandra. Therefore, you can put more column information inside just one column. Don't worry, I'm gonna show it to you. And the last sample is about receipt. What we need to do here, I put my receipt name, I put the city where the receipt comes from, and my ingredients. I put a set of information, and my ingredient has the name and the quantity and the unity. I can use this power of Cassandra. I don't need to make any kind of relationship. Okay, I explained about Cassandra, what Cassandra is not, so don't go to this way if you like to use Cassandra. Don't think about relational database. You have the power to model your NoSQL database, your Cassandra NoSQL database all this way, right? That's amazing. You can use Unity, you can use list, you can use set. Avoid to think about relationship on Cassandra as well. Don't do that, please. And beyond that, uh, I'm gonna show the code. Don't worry about that. Let's show a little bit about MongoDB, right? Because MongoDB is so far the most popular one. The first step tip to you is let me explain you what MongoDB is not. If you are using the newest version of MongoDB, yes, you have transaction. You also have the ASCII property, and that's amazing. However, if you go deep on the documentation, say if you are using too much transaction, that means you are not doing the right way to use MongoDB. You are doing some mistake on the modeling of the MongoDB. So yes, MongoDB has the feature, but avoid to use. If you don't trust me, just go to MongoDB documentation itself, right? My first tip about how can I model MongoDB is this representation for Ori in. He explaining about how can I modeling my application in a NoSQL world, more specifically on the document types, and he explaining why we do a lot of mistake on model. Usually because you need to model our application in the beginning. In this time, you have no idea exactly where the product goes on, right? So that's the whole point about modeling. And the basic, the whole point about this modeling uh, is use DDD to make the modeling best as possible. You need to take three properties: coherence, independence, isolation, to make this perfect word on the MongoDB on any kind of document type. The first one, self-sufficient. You need to make sure uh, a document is good enough to be alive. It makes sense to your business to move on. The next one, independence. Why not? We need to make sure it makes sense first to be self-sufficient and make sure to your business, and then on the dependence, it does not need anybody else. We need to make sure that. The third topic is more isolation. If you need to do any kind of update on this document and another one and another one and another one, you're not following the isolation topic. And don't worry, because MongoDB has the uh, subdocument property. You can put entities inside entities. There is no problem with that. Okay, again, enhance independence isolation. And let's go to first sample here. Yes, if you are familiar with DDD, you're probably gonna do that right. Um, the sample here is to create another model where I have my ID, my object ID. I have my local date time order at. I have my address where I should ship my order, and for sure my products. As you can see here, I don't need a relationship. I put everything in just one document collection. Why that? Basically, usually when I'm gonna search for the order, I need to know the products, items, and I need to know where this product goes, right? That's why I create just one huge entity with aggregate and value object. And that is the whole point about modeling a NoSQL database on MongoDB or any kind of document. Usually, when you talk about MongoDB, or when you talk about Cassandra or any kind of NoSQL database, we need to think about cloud, right? Because cloud is amazing. Why not? Um, there's a huge discussion about containers because container is amazing for sure. However, it's not work very well on the multiple way. So if you have any kind of a container where you need to expose a volume, sometimes you're gonna degrade it performance. And guess what? That's the whole point of database, right? You need to have one point to store any kind of information. And that usually does not work very well on containers. Yes, you can do. You can use container with Kubernetes, but there is a huge discussion about, okay, should I use container with database? Should I not? The last topic is about service. There is a new approach about database as a service. And why not use, I mean, if you are familiar with MongoDB, you can use Atlas DB. You can use, if you are familiar with Elasticsearch, Elasticsearch has a database as a service as well. Therefore, we don't need to worry about backup, don't need to worry about performance, configuration, some hard topics on discussion. You take your instance, you select the instance, it's going to expose to you with some security information where you can use the 12 factor application to override that configuration on production, right? And use database as service might be make your life easier than take the whole responsibility to handle your the database by your home. Okay. Usually when you talk about Java and NoSQL database, for sure you need to think about Java frameworks. Why not? As I mentioned before, NoSQL does not mean no validation. And to make sure, if you're a Java developer, you can use Beam validation, right? Uh, you can use ORM. I usually put ORM, but it's more relational database. But I mean, you can use any kind of mapper. If you want to use a Spring Data, MongoDB, if you want to use Micronauts, MongoDB, you can use Quarkus, you can use Jakarta, NoSQL, you can use whatever you want. But beware that there is the impedance of between your NoSQL database and your programming language. For example, in Java, you have interface, you have several things that are not able to use on my NoSQL database itself. You need to remember every time that what you are using on the persistence mode does not reflect 100% of your language, program language, right? And a good point about reactive program in NoSQL database that is usually we have driver to support that. So if you'd like to use MongoDB, if you'd like to use Cassandra, the drive is ready to use reactive program. Okay, let's show a little bit of code here. Don't worry, I know I don't have enough time. Basically, what I did here, uh, I create this package, two package, one to column, one to document. As you can see, I'm using Maven application where I'm using Java 11 with CDI 2.0 and Jakarta NoSQL. But you can use whatever you want. Again, Spring Data, Quarkus, Micronauts, whatever you want. And I'm using MongoDB and Cassandra, right? If you are familiar with uh, uh, microprofile, you probably know that is these property files here, right? As I mentioned before, I put the full configuration to run that locally. And when it goes to production, I can override any kind of information. Column, you can think about Cassandra. I put the database sample, my configuration. So that is my provider. And I did almost something here to MongoDB. One point, MongoDB is schemaless. That means I don't need to create previously the database. And Cassandra is not. As you can see here, I'm creating key space. I'm creating the types. I'm gonna show to you to finally create my column family. Key space, if you are from SQL database, think about database. The types is a special type, and column family you can think about table on relational database, right? Let's start with Cassandra. What I did here, I create my car type, right? As I mentioned before, I have my car, that is my entity, and I create my owner, that is a type, right? So let's show here. Owner, a type that has the name and the license. Let's go here. Owner, name, and license. And when I go to car, I have my ID, my city, my color, and the last one is my owner. And as you can see here, I put the whole information on just one table. I don't need to have, indeed, you don't need to use uh, relationship on Cassandra. I'm using Jakarta NoSQL here. So I create my Cassandra template. I create my owner and then use my builder. I create my car and I'm gonna search and then I'm gonna select my information here. So let's first, oh yeah, I'm using Docker Compose to start my service, Cassandra document with MongoDB. Let's start here. Okay, let's increase the font. Uh, CD, no sync design pitfall, Docker Compose down to make sure it's not up. Docker Compose up. And it's gonna start my both service, Cassandra and MongoDB. It's starting. And let's run the first one. Why not? Okay, I'm gonna search and then I'm gonna do a query. It is starting. Ba, 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 ba. It starts the CDI, as you can see. It is creating my whole structure where I put here. You have several ways to make that happen. And as you can see in my log, what I put my license. So car, plate, Salvador, my color. One good point here is you can find the TTL. What does that mean? You can define the type to the information not there anymore. For example, you can find duration of seconds. So let's put 1 second and time unit of seconds, sleep for 2 seconds. Don't do that on production, please. So basically what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna define the time to live of 1 second when wait for 2 seconds, and when I do a query again, it's gonna show empty. Query results. As you can see, it's empty. Let's run and put a little bit better a log. Again, it's going to start my CDI container, as you can see here. And the query result is empty. Why? Because I defined the TTL of 1 second and wait for 2 seconds. And you can do that for free in Cassandra, that native from Cassandra, right? So let's go to the second sample. It was my first one. So basically, I have my car, and it has a UDT. UDT is uh, subcolumn, subdocument to Cassandra. The next sample is Cassandra Template, where I have my address, I have my contact, and as you can see, I create my map here. I put my label in my inf, and in the end, the details is just a map. Let's show the model to you. As you can see here, I create my contact, my primary key, my birthday, my details is basically map where the text is a key and text is value. On this case here, I put my Twitter handle, phone, and my Facebook. And again, I can do almost the same thing, right? Let's go to the last one. It's receipt. And as you can see, it's a little bit different from SQL database. The last one is I'm gonna show the receipt. So my receipt here have the name, the city, and the ingredients. As you can see, my ingredients are from set, and I put on this set the name, the quantity, and the unit. Let's show again my properties. Ingredient. I create the type ingredient, and the column family ingredient receive here, where I put my set of ingredients. What that show is because that's native from Cassandra. I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to emulate nothing. So name, city, ingredient. I don't need to go deeper again. Basically, I'm gonna do the same thing. So I can insert and then do query, right? So there's no rush. And let's move on to MongoDB. Why not? The MongoDB, I don't need to create any kind of schema before. That's why it's schemaless, right? What I did here, I create my order where I have my object ID, my local, when I order this order, and my product items, and my address. So my name, my product name, and the value. As you can see, I'm using the Money API. That's a specification for the Java world. And let's show the package. It has the javax name, so javax.money monetary amount. And my application is basically, oops, is basically show to you my my money itself, right? So basically, I don't need to create anything. I'm gonna search, and when I search, it's gonna create to me magically everything. Okay. Beyond that, I also have, let's share the link where you can check the whole details here. So that's the link, the first link. And then what I'm gonna do, basically I create as well, let's show this little bit high here, 1 second. And yes, if you want, you can create microservice with MongoDB. Why not? Let's load. Basically, what I did here, I create a microservice to handle the deploy Friday episode and using MongoDB. Let's show the code because I don't have enough time. Um, I'm using microprofile where I can put the schema to define the Open API validation. So basically, I can create Open API, and also I'm using Jakarta NoSQL uh, to make that happen. As I mentioned before, I'm using my default configuration to run locally, and on production, I can override the whole information to you. On the cloud native provider, we have several approaches. You have a huge amount of approach. On my case, I'm using Platform SH because to me it's easier to take my application, move to the cloud. Basically, to make that happen, I just need 3 files. One to define my application itself, one to define my service, and one to define the host. As you can see, basically I have my file to define my application where I have my name, the type, and the version, Java 11, the command to build my application itself, and the command to start my application. As you can see, I put the credential to basically override the whole information to me on production because as a developer, I don't need to know about that. Please don't need to know, right? And let's show the resource. So basically, I put a little bit of episode here. Oh yeah, if you are familiar with Spring Data, Jakarta NoSQL has the exactly same thing. So you put the interface and don't need to worry about anything. And yes, you can play with this repository, this resource. So it's basically small resource to handle your application. Let me share to you the link here. And you have the deploy on platform SH click button. So if you click, you can choose to create your application. So hello, sample. You define a region where you want to deploy this application. And that is it. So the application is ready to go to the cloud. I guess I have one sample ready here. Basically, what it's gonna do, it's gonna create the container, one to my service, MongoDB, my application in my host. And as you can see here, the log is gonna download the whole internet because it's Maven, right? So it's gonna download the whole dependency to build my application and then run, execute. As you can see, it's a simple micro profile hello world. And basically, as you can see, it's doing that. That's that was my demonstration. So basically, I did some tips about Cassandra and then MongoDB, and finally I show a sample of microservice with MongoDB on Jakarta EE World with microprofile and Jakarta NoSQL. And the last one, I show a little bit of platform message because cloud is amazing, but there is a huge complexity. And when you think about complexity, you need to think twice because there are costs and risk to put your application in the cloud, right? So platform message is much more than a hosting. It's a polyglot multi-cloud PaaS platform as a service, and you can put as much application you want to. So you can put monolith, microservice, stateful, stateless application, and so on. And the whole approach is to create infrastructure as a code. And I show to you, I have 3 files and make my application ready to run. The first one is the application itself. This application file defines how my application works, the type where you can put the language, and then the version, or in this case Java 11, the command to use and the command to run my application, and the relationship. Remember the security, right? I need to make sure the right application grant the right database. In this case, I'm accessing PostgreSQL. The service where I just need to define the service that I need and don't need to handle and rush about anything else because platform message is gonna handle that to you. And the host, right? And that's the whole scope of platform message. We have several clients, so you can take a look and you can give feedbacks. And that is my whole presentation. I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you for your time.